Hi guys, I'm Alex. It's interesting. I feel like his endpoint on emails, I kind of get to a similar point in my talk, but I feel like mine's a little bit hacking together with paper clips and string. Before I get into it, I was just curious, who here does not know how to code? Okay. For the people that raise their hands, you're in luck. For the people that are more technical, hopefully you get something useful out of this as well. A bit of background on me. I'm an entrepreneur, an investor, and I don't have a programming background. I've always admired people that do. I've just really gone deep with this stuff and wanted to kind of share some of the things that I've taken from that, some of the things I've built and am building at the moment. So in general, I'm huge on productivity. I really like finding ways to make life more efficient. Some of the things that I've either built or I'm working on, one is a bot that knows my writing style and can reply to emails in the way that I would normally talk or I would normally write. The second is a tool that reads my emails and organizes them based on different folders depending on what's the content coming in. The third is one that picks out particular newsletters. I subscribe to lots of newsletters on different topics, and I get lots of content through that of different types. And so that has a store of my interests and checks the content against my interests and then gives me a daily report of what's most interesting to me. The next is a language tutor. I'm currently in the process of learning Chinese, and I want to find a way of learning that's relevant to me. So it takes my sent emails and picks out one sentence every few hours and tells me how to say that in Chinese, what are the key words out of that, and any interesting grammatical things that I should know about that. The next is I've got a store of my workouts as well as my schedule. And so then it just computes the difference between my workouts and schedule and gives me thoughts on what I should be doing next. And then the last is one that manages my calendar. And so, and I think what's interesting about this is you really don't need a detailed programming background or need to have a background in machine learning to build some of this stuff. The vast majority I've built with a combination of ChatGPT, Slack, or whatever your preferred chat interface is, and a couple of these examples I'll be using Telegram, and Google Sheets. The one extra thing is I also use a tool called make.com. And so if you don't know how to program, there's a couple automation tools out there that are incredibly useful. One is Zapier, which is very simple. Make.com is a little bit more complex because you can put together integrated flows of how you'd like things to work. And yeah, with that, this is MacGyver approved. So I wanted to get into what are the prompts that I use regularly, starting with the most simple one and kind of work up from there. So I want to take you on a journey of, what's the most simple prompt that I use regularly? And that's emojis. I actually will throw content. I really get frustrated, going through the menus of picking out the best emoji. So I throw content at ChatGPT and say, give me 5 emojis for this. And so I think what's interesting, though, here is every prompt that you give it, you can really think about it as a set of instructions and a set of input data, right? And so that's important because when you're using, essentially this is, initial work, but I think when you're working with ChatGPT, I find myself continually repeating the instructions that I'm giving it. And instead of, working and developing those instructions over time, which for me is repetitive, it's not very efficient, it's kind of a waste of time. So instead, I think the next layer that I've kind of got to was, well, can I bring ChatGPT into Sheets? And so if you're not aware, there's a couple tools that you can bring into your Google Sheets. One's called GPT for Work. The other one's called Sheet GPT. And these will effectively allow you to write a GPT prompt or a ChatGPT prompt directly within your Google Sheets. That's important for a couple reasons. One, you can then do calculations with other formulas that sit in your sheet. But two, more interestingly, it allows you to separate the instructions from the input data. And when you do that, you can really start to then work on your prompts over time so they become much more detailed, much more nuanced, and there's a lot of value to that. So same example, asking for emojis, this is what I get back. So that kind of leads me into the next bit of, for me, the second most, one of the other common things that I use ChatGPT for is essentially I might start an email, write a few lines, chuck it in ChatGPT, and very lazily say, improve this. And when I do that, this is what comes back. So this is an email where I was sending to an advisor about ideas about how to hedge currency within our business. And what comes back, I kind of want to vomit. Like, I trust this message finds you in good health and high spirits. It's like, it's robotic, it's empty. It doesn't really sound anything like me. So then I might tell it, hey, well, improve this, but use a casual tone. And then I might say, improve this, but use a casual tone, but use short sentences. And that kind of process went on and on for me as I kind of added more and more things. And eventually what I did was I just took 5 or 10 of the most recent emails that I've sent to people, put it in ChatGPT and said, hey, what are the guidelines or lessons that I could give to an LLM that would get you to speak more like me? And this is what came back. So essentially now I've got this really long detailed prompt that can sit within my Excel sheet, and I can run that every time I now want to improve an email. Also with that, as I can take anyone else's content and I can throw it in that and get it to sound like me. So if this is what ChatGPT produced, this is what my prompt reader GPT produced. So, hey Don, I hope you're well. With everything going on in the big picture, I want to protect against currency risks. Do you know any recommendations for brokers or services to use this? I pretty much could send that email. Like, I wouldn't need to change anything within it. So then the next thing for me was, okay, that's great, but how do I share that with my team? How do I get other people to engage with this and want to play with this tool, but not have them fiddling around and messing up these very detailed and nuanced prompts that I've built on the back end? And so that's where Make comes in. So this is make.com. This is a typical thing you'll see. So basically what this does is it just says, takes, hey, Telegram message received, update the cell in D2, then take back the cell in D5, and then give that back to the user. And so putting that very simple chat interface and separating the user from the backend prompts gives me a very flexible playground with which to build interesting things that I can share with other people. And then those other people can then get the value from those detailed prompts that I'm building. So in the case of the emojis, I've got a Telegram bot that I write stuff to it, and it returns emojis immediately. Same thing in the case of the prompt writer. But I think what's interesting is it's really about the structure of essentially what this is, which is chat in some set of database, some stored data and nuance about instructions I want to give it. And that can actually be a range of different things. So then I started thinking about, well, email. Okay, instead of just having someone prompt this and something come into it, why couldn't just every email just go into a particular prompt, update a sheet, and then come back? And couldn't that just, instead of just checking my guidelines, could it also check my guidelines for how I'd like my calendar to be managed? Could it also check what's on my calendar if I just synced up my calendar separately within Google Sheets? And the answer to that is yes, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But also, if you think about there's many other data stores that we have in our life, and there's a lot of value from both taking this kind of all this data that's sitting around us, documenting it, putting in organized formats, and then also there's a lot of value in documenting our detailed and nuanced thought processes, which we've never really taken the time to write down, in the same way I talked about the prompt. So when I said, okay, if I want to do this and said, take that thing that it can write emails now like me and sound like me, could I just replace myself and have an EA that sits on top of my email, takes everything in, decides what's the best way to handle this, and then returns, puts an email draft in my folder. And so to do that, I basically set up a similar thing. This is very similar, where it's a webhook, parses out some of the excess text that you don't need, puts that into Google Sheets, and then takes out from Google Sheets the other answer. But before I got there, it really was, that kind of led me to another big finding, which is I think ChatGPT prompts can be used to be incredibly powerful categorization engines. In the same way that you might set up a bunch of rules. Well, to give you a bit of context, I subscribe to lots of newsletters, so I get lots of newsletters in my emails. I get relevant stuff that I need to reply to. And then I also get a lot of unsolicited just sales emails from people that I've never met or talked to. And you might be able to set a rule of saying, okay, block that email address, or avoid this. But I think it's actually much more interesting when you could use a conceptual diagram to then do that instead. And just say, ChatGPT, does this look like a sales email? Yes, no. If so, give me a number. So in this case, I got an email from someone at SalesMango. I hope no one here is at SalesMango. But if you were, I didn't read your email. And so that correctly categorizes this as a sales email. And I think using this kind of flexible tool, this kind of categorization engine, allows you to do other things with it. So here's another example. This is a guy who's emailing me to schedule some time. It correctly, using the same prompt, said this is something I should reply to. OK, so now I've got this categorization piece sitting on top of my email. And essentially I said, OK, if it's a sales email, put it in a separate folder that'll probably get deleted later. If it's a newsletter, send it to a separate Google Sheet where I've got that stored, and that's where I'm pulling out the interesting bits that I want in my daily report. And then if it's something I do need to reply to, update that particular sheet that I was just showing you guys. So again, using the categorization engine, I think actually what's interesting is I found that as I added different bits of prompts that I want to include into the prompt that I want to use, I was able to then put on top of that another kind of categorization prompt, which is just, OK, to reply to this email, what do you need access to? And there, this is that same email before asking me about scheduling some time, and simply asking it, OK, giving it multiple choice and what can it access to? It correctly says, OK, I need access to your calendar. And so then in Google Sheets, I can simply write a simple formula. If this is a 2, just pull in the cell that has my next 10 days of calendar. Because that's also synced up with the same sheet. So what comes back, and this is kind of hard to read, but essentially in here, I've got guidelines for how I'd like it to schedule meetings, how I'd like it to do these things. This is cut off, but in here, there's a long detail of what my calendar looks like. This is the incoming email. And essentially, I'm asking it to filter this using a couple things. So 1, using my calendar guidelines. 2, not conflicting with the calendar, anything in my calendar. And then 3, to draft a reply that uses, again, the detailed prompt writing guidelines that can at least communicate in the way that I would communicate. And ultimately, what comes back is basically an email that I think is pretty acceptable to just send. And so for me, that then sits into my Gmail drafts. And I get a Telegram message saying, hey, I've prepped a draft response for you to send out. And then I can go in, take a look. Does it make sense? Should I send it? Yes, no. I think that's kind of interesting because as you kind of get through this and kind of keep building with it, you're like, wow, actually, it might be tedious and complex to do this one time. But if I've done it once and continue to tweak it and manage it, I'm going to quickly get to a point where I don't ever have to touch my emails. And that's all not without necessarily using some of the more complex systems that Paul was showing us. So in total, I think this is kind of where it leads us. But I think what's important is I think a lot of the hype in the current AI market is thinking about ChatGPT or language models as these kind of all-seeing, all-knowing things that if I just ask it the right question, I'll get the thing back. And I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think instead, you have to think about it as a very flexible and malleable puzzle piece that fits within much larger systems that you can use for things like categorization, that you can use for things like coming up with the prompts. And so coming back to what I built, I'm just finding a lot of value with that and kind of wanted to share some of the learnings out of it. Which is why Andrej Karpathy said the hottest new programming language is effectively English, because the amazing part about it is you don't need to be super technical to build some of these systems. At least at an initial phase. If you want to go to production, sure, you can talk to somebody to work with that and scale it. So that's my talk. And happy to take any questions.
I'm asking the question of how you manage to interface to the calendar. I think does Make have a particular kind of connection to your Google Calendar that allowed you to, in a sense, structure the data in such that you were able to then make the decisions in terms of routing. So I wanted to understand a little bit about how you actually managed to compile your calendar entries in a particular day that you then possibly use that as a prompt. Just to talk about that.
Yeah.
Alex, can you repeat the question, please?
Sorry.
So the question was, am I using a calendar API or something like that? How do I get what's in my calendar into Google Sheets? And it's a good question, because I think that gets to what is Zapier and Make.com, what do they do? And effectively, they're tools where you can plug in access to any of your other apps or things that you use day to day. There's actually, both Make.com and Zapier have thousands of integrations that you can then click, search your favorite tool, trigger happens in this app, output happens in this app. So in that case, all I'm doing is I'm running a daily thing that basically says, okay, in the morning, pull in my next 10 days of calendar and replace the existing cells that are in there. So just essentially show a sheet of line by line what's the calendar, each event entry as another cell. And then I have one formula that just pulls that all into one cell, and then that gets fed into the prompt.
So yeah, thank you very much. You are technical and you can code. I'm just telling you that. That's very impressive. But I was wondering if you considered the cybersecurity aspect, because I'm not an expert on that, but if I could just send you an email with malicious prompting that would be automatically passed through the system and break it and or exploit it.
Yeah, it's a very valid point. Which is why this is not on hard mode. This is on easy mode. There are issues with it. I wouldn't recommend going into production with it. But if you want to play around and you don't have a technical background, it's a nice place to play. So yeah, I agree. There are some issues with it. But I guess the other question would be, what things could you email me that, I guess that's actually a good question. You probably could get something out of it. Yeah.
Unrelated question, what's your email address?
Thanks for that, that was brilliant. How do you see things playing out? Because LLMs have got so much attention from an investment point of view, but it really seems like the interpretation of, the piecing together of things and making it work for individuals and enterprises, the big opportunity here. How do you see investment in the next 5 years looking for this whole area?
Yeah, I think the space is changing so quickly, which I think if you think about technical moats alone are really hard to sustain because people can kind of hack around and build things that are quite interesting and quite useful. There's actually some really interesting posts out there, but I think the key, there's a couple keys. I think I'm not building production level things to sell to people, but I think for those that are, if you can incorporate data in some way and deliver an increasingly personalized experience to the user experience, I think there's a lot of value and you can probably build some sort of moat with that. But I think a lot of the tools that are just tools that you use here and there, maybe the ones where you see, okay, I can create a video of myself or I can create an image of myself. I think it's really hard to defend those types of business models long term because it's moving so quickly. Yeah, if that answers your question.
Nice. Yeah, straight off the back of what that gentleman said, you are an engineer. The thinking process to do that is amazing. But my question was around the first slide. You mentioned, I think, winners somehow winning repeatedly.
Systems.
Yeah. So my question is, how has this made you win? And what's kind of the the efficacy of your system? Are you more productive? Are you gymming much better? Let us know the effectiveness.
It's had...
Don't forget to repeat the question.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Question being, what is the real impact on your life and how has it made a difference? So that quote came from a guy, James Clear, and he talks, and it comes from a book, Atomic Habits, where he talks about if you want to build sustained habits, the key to doing so is figuring out what's the smallest possible component of that and then doing just that. And oftentimes he gives you the example of, okay, if you want to get in better shape, simply just track, did I go to the gym? Simply doing that alone, not actually going to the gym, makes a huge difference. And after I read that book, I incorporated a lot of those principles into my life. So I think it was 2019, that year I said, okay, this year I'm setting no goals for myself. I'm just setting a goal of tracking the metrics in my life that I care about. And then I created a chart and I kind of had my data and it was all just plugging together different apps and automating it. And what that led to was, essentially gradual and progressive improvement in what I was doing with a sense of compassion that I don't think you necessarily get if you just try and go on a diet plan, or if you just try and go to the gym and then you kind of don't sustain it for 2 weeks. But if you see actually, yeah, well, you know, my past 30-day average or my past 60-day average is better than it was 6 months ago. So you kind of progressively feel good about these things once you build a system of capturing that, getting perspective on it, and looking at it. So that actually has had a dramatic impact on my life in terms of my health, in terms of my sleep schedule, in terms of a lot of different factors, which I'd love to talk in more detail. But it's made a really big difference.
So should we stop there? More questions after?
Yeah, sure.
Go on to
I do have one last thing to share, which so one thing that we're working on, I've been collaborating with a Bay Area-based AI network. It's actually a global network now because they've got centers in both the Bay Area and in New York. And essentially, it's a community of builders who share events and collaborate. And so part of this is we have built an organized and automated tracker of AI events in London. And so for that, if you want to have access to it, I'm going to be posting it on my social media, which will link here. And yeah, essentially, the more people we can get this tool into people's hands, the more people share it, the more value it has for everybody. So yeah, if you want to just come talk to me and we'll connect.
Thank you very much.